Hello and welcome to the Doctors Who Read Stuff. Today we're covering the last section of Book 1 of Dune by Frank Herbert. Paul, much like Ozzy Osbourne, is going through changes. In many ways, his mental abilities have leapfrogged his own mother. Is this due to the stress, the trauma, the spice, or is it just convenient timing? We discuss all this and more next. Okay, welcome to the Doctors Who Read Stuff. My name is Chris.
And I'm Chip.
And I'm Brian.
And here we are. This is the last section before the end of Book 1. It always confuses me when they have like Book 1 and Book 2 in one book. But I think in our very first episode, we mentioned that this was originally broken out into two, wasn't it?
Well, it was originally released as a serial within Analog magazine. Okay. So they were like longer, they were kind of in a shorter story format, but they were tied together. And I think then he kind of pulled them all together to get it published as one complete work.
Got it. Maybe that was it. So
I'd have to go back and make sure I'm right. I'm close, but anyway.
That's good enough, I think, for our purposes.
Paul's going through a lot of changes here. I think this one there's so much going on, and I know we're just going to kind of cover this one scene tonight, but there's so much going on with Paul, and you really start to see all the training that he's gotten from his Bene Gesserit mother and from Thufir the Mentat, and then kind of he's just so hyper aware of everything around him that he sees all these different threads that lead to these different possibilities and these futures that are going to come to pass. And what does he keep recalling? It's his terrible purpose, isn't that what he calls it?
Yeah.
Basically his destiny is a terrible purpose.
So very early on in this section, Paul, this is from Paul's point of view. It says, something had happened to his awareness this night. He saw with a sharpened clarity every circumstance and occurrence around him. He felt unable to stop the inflow of data or the cold precision with which each new item was added to his knowledge, and the computation was centered in his awareness. It was Mentat power and more. So like very, very early on in this section, we're like, something's going on.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too how many times he doesn't always say it out loud, so we're in his head and we're hearing his thoughts, but how many times he's talking about how his mom's not picking this up. She's slow on this. She's not getting this. She doesn't understand this.
Right.
And it just shows, I think that's more of a device for Herbert to show just how big of a leap Paul has made in just this short amount of time. That this, I think when you did the intro earlier, it was the combination of the stress, the situation, the anger, the spice, all these things are just kind of coalescing at the same time and resulting in Paul's, like quantum leap forward in his evolution.
Yeah. So you mentioned that Paul thinks her mother is slow to come to things, but Jessica also senses that Paul's mind has leapt ahead of her, that it is now, that it now saw more than she does. So she's aware of the change as well. And he's even to the point where he has this recognition and this understanding of all the intricacies and the full scope of everything that the Harkonnens are trying to do. He's like, because they're listening to the radio and they're putting pieces together, and he's like, I expected that.
Yeah, and I think that just the cold logic, it's almost like Vulcan logic, I'm going to go through all this. I'll mourn my father later when there's time. He just, all this other stuff he's going to.
And it's not even the fact that he's like, he's choosing to grieve later. He's like, I can't grieve. I'm not doing it.
There's so much. Yeah.
So, yeah. He's only computing at this point.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Although it's more than just computing. There's still almost like a certain mysticism. If you could combine almost like the android-like skills and computational skills of the Mentats, and then you get the mysticism and the almost like street knowledge of the Bene Gesserits. He is like trying to fuse the two together in a different way than's been done before.
Yeah, and I think I read somewhere, it's logic and intuition are the two things that he's able to take he's able to kind of extrapolate all these different things with the mentat side of things, but he can kind of then visualize and see where things are going, with the Bene Gesserit side. So.
And we talked about how his mind is just racing, and like he says, and now he saw that he had a wealth of data few such minds ever before him had encompassed, but this made the empty place within him no easier to bear. I'm assuming that empty place is the fact that basically his whole world just fell apart. His father is dead, his mom and him are on the run, and he thinks he should be having this emotional reaction, and there's nothing. That's what I took it to be.
Which my first thought was, don't cry, you fool. You don't want to lose the water out of your eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad they touched on that later.
Yeah.
It's like that's such an important part of life.
Yeah.
And he talks to his mom about awakening the sleeper. He says the spice changes anyone who gets this much, but thanks to Jessica's training, Paul and the mentat training, Paul could bring the change to consciousness. So people that live there are going to be altered, but it'll be at an unconscious or a subconscious level. It's not going to be something that they're going to be aware of or can leverage.
Yeah, it's like a slow addiction. Yeah. And then, with him, it's just almost like an overdose right away. But because of his training, he's able to
switch,
manage it to a point.
I really liked this section. I thought it was really, really well laid out. Like, you start with something happened to his awareness, and it just kind of builds, and he starts talking about being able to see all the paths before him, and like being able to go down one or go down the other. And he talks about the waking dream, which we can touch on here in a second. And he's able to just compute all of these things. And at one point he tells his mother, he's like, it's not even a leap, it's a straight line computation. And she's like, you're not a mentat yet. He's like, I don't have to be, because look what you did to me.
Yeah.
But it's...
Well, and right before that is when he kind of makes the connection that, hey, there's things in the deep desert. Somebody's paying off the guild to keep things secret, and it's got to be the Fremen that are keeping, they're paying the guild to keep the secrets of the deep desert. And it's the line right after that is when she says, you're not a mentat yet.
Yes.
You can't know for sure.
Yeah. And it's like they have the best currency in the world in unlimited quantities. It's like, take out your weather satellites, have some spice. And
the guild can't operate without it.
Yeah.
So
the navigators are kind of like...
But he also says But his response to that line, though, that you're not a mentat yet, he's like, I'll never be a mentat. I'm a freak. I'm something else. I'm a freak.
Yeah. Now, this was written in the 60s, and I'm not sure if freak had a different connotation then than it does now or not.
I don't know. I assumed it kind of meant just I don't really belong anywhere. I'm not a mentat. I'm not a Bene Gesserit. I'm not really an Atreides anymore. I'm not any of these things. I'm something else entirely. I guess, and that's the line that led into it, is I'm something else.
Yeah. ...
freak.
Yeah.
But I think it's I'm something else. I don't know really what I am, but I'm not what I was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he talks about his waking dream. He's like, no, I'm going to tell you that I'm on the level because you're going to bear a daughter out here. I already know her name. And she had, nobody else knew. She only knew because of her Bene Gesserit training that something was going on. He said, we'll find a home among the Fremen. And then he drops the bombshell. We carry our past with us. And, mother mine, there's a thing you don't know and should. We are Harkonnens.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, it's everything... I don't know. We talked last time about how, like, the Duke and the Emperor were cousins, but it seemed like the Duke and the Baron were also cousins. And
so it's kind of like a twisted Game of Thrones family
it is
tree
kind
type
of.
thing.
It's like,
it is.
and then Paul reveals that Jessica is actually the Baron's daughter. So does that mean Leto was
But she
sleeping
never
with
knew
his...
her father.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Because I thought it was the way he put it was that he wanted to go experience some tryst or something. And, the result of that was that she was born. Yeah, you're the Baron's own daughter, he said. The Baron sampled many pleasures in his youth and once permitted himself to be seduced, but it was for the genetic purposes of the Bene Gesserit by one of you.
Yeah. Yep.
So that was basically the Baron just wanted to go experience this. He didn't care what the result was, but the result was Jessica.
Yeah.
Man.
Yep.
That is a really weird family tree.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's some interesting stuff about Paul being the Kwisatz Haderach as well. Because he says, I'm not what they expected and I've arrived before my time. And that's when Jessica's like, oh, crap. Oh, crap. And so she's like, okay, he is the Kwisatz Haderach. And he says, you're thinking I am, but put that out of your mind. I'm something unexpected. So, and we don't know what that is yet.
Well, and then he says you couldn't possibly know what it is. She asked, if you're not the Kwisatz Haderach, what?
Right.
You couldn't possibly know. You won't believe it until you see it.
Yeah. Now, I remember reading this probably back in college, and it might have been about that long since I've read it. I don't remember this part of like him coming into this level of awareness until Brian, excuse me for a moment, until he took the water of life. So to read this part, I'm like, oh, okay. So
yeah, and I don't want to get into spoiler territories, because the water of life gives him the ability to see somewhere else too.
Yes. But that was just something that I was reading this. I'm like, holy crap, I don't remember any of this. So it's been a while. I'm almost as old as Chip.
Yeah, you're catching up.
Yeah.
Wait, math doesn't compute.
Make a crappy mentat.
Chip, you're not a mentat yet.
If I'm slowing down, then... Yeah, but I guess I remember the sleeper has awoken, or the sleeper must awaken type stuff from... I know that's a big thing in Lynch's movie, and it's not as touched on in here, but he does talk about the sleeper and that he's all of a sudden awakened to see all these different things and understand these different things.
Yeah, I don't know. This was a really cool, just developmental section for Paul. And going into book 2, you're just like, I mean, the dynamic had already changed because of all the things that had happened. But now you no longer have this 16-year-old boy trying to live up to his father's ducal presence. I mean, now he's like, no, I'm going to make a Doctor Who reference. I'm the oncoming storm, basically. I mean, that's the gist. That's the jive I'm getting here. So, yeah. I don't know.
So I guess as he kind of gets into the closing scenes here, he talks about being a seed, and that he found he could no longer hate the Bene Gesserit or the Emperor or even the Harkonnens. They are all caught up in this need of their race to renew its scattered inheritance, cross and mingle, and infuse their bloodlines into great new pooling of genes. And there was only one way to do this, and that was through jihad. So I know that was always a big thing that I remember when I read this years ago, and I remember it being a big thing in the Lynch movie too, that the whole, the holy war that they're going to unleash. Oh, sorry, Brian.
Well, we still have over half the book
what a
left.
jihad is, so
I do.
Yeah,
but it's Yeah, I figured the book didn't just end after this chapter.
Oh,
I figured
good.
there was something else that was coming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting because, in a way, Herbert's kind of doing what he did at the beginning. Things, that UA is going to betray him. The Harkonnens are going to, set a trap. And now it's all these different visions that Paul's having that, the Fremen are going to accept us. They're going to call me muad'dib. They're going to, do all these things. We're going to start a jihad. So it's almost like he's, again, things are going to happen in the next couple hundred pages, but it's still exciting going into them, not necessarily knowing how they're going to happen, but kind of knowing that some of those outcomes have been foretold.
Yeah. And then the last thing before the section ends is that he's like, okay, I'm done doing all my crazy superhuman mentat stuff. Now I can cry.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And he was wasting water down his cheeks.
Yeah. Yeah. But what can you do?
But they did have still suits on at that point.
They did.
So some of it might
I
have been captured.
suppose.
Yeah, I mean, they have to have a mechanism for capturing tears. What if you're a Fremen and you stub your toe? Right?
Yeah, or you get sand in your eye.
Yeah.
Paper cut.
Yeah.
It gets everywhere.
Oh, you had to do that, didn't you?
On that note,
Chris, man.
If you enjoyed this, please click the like button. Please click the subscribe button. Please sound off in the comments. We would love to converse with you. And also check the description below for which sections we'll be covering in our next episode. Thank you very much for watching. We hope to see you next time. And Brian?
Alonzi.